Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going on a pretty unique architectural tour, but we're not looking at a building. We're exploring the blueprints of one of the most influential collections of texts in human history. We're diving into the Bible, but maybe in a way you haven't thought of before. See, we're not going to treat it as just one single book. We're going to see it for what it really is, an ancient, masterfully designed library.
So let's just start with the big question that kind of flips everything on its head. Is the Bible actually a single book? It seems simple, right? But the answer really changes how we approach and understand everything inside.
And the answer is nope, not really. A far better way to think about it, and the metaphor we're going to run with today, is that the Bible is a library. I mean, think about it. It's this huge collection of scrolls and texts written by all sorts of different people in different styles over hundreds and hundreds of years, all brought together into one curated collection.
So here's the blueprint for our tour. We'll start with the idea of the library itself. Then we'll explore its foundation, the three pillars of the Tanakh. From there, we'll look at the Christian Two Testament design and figure out how this whole collection was put together using something called a canon. We'll see why different libraries have different books and wrap it all up with a really powerful lesson hidden in the structure itself. You ready? Let's go.
Okay, our tour begins in the oldest wing of the library. This is the foundational collection of Hebrew scriptures known as the Tanakh. This is the holy book of Judaism, and it's also the bedrock of what Christians would later call the Old Testament.
You know, the name Tanakh is actually super clever. It's basically a table of contents built right into the word. It's an acronym. The T stands for Torah, or instruction. The N is for Nevi'im, which means prophets. And the K is for Ketuvim, or writings. So the name literally tells you the three main sections, the three pillars of the entire collection. How cool is that?
So that first pillar, the Torah, man, this is the granite foundation of the entire library. It's the first 5 books, also known as the books of Moses. It kicks off with the story of all of creation in Genesis, then it zooms in on the story of Israel's escape from Egypt in Exodus. Leviticus and Numbers lay out the laws for the community, and it all wraps up with Moses' powerful final speeches in Deuteronomy. It's the core narrative.
Next, we walk into the Nevi'im, the prophets. You can think of these as the grand halls of the library, telling Israel's story after Moses. It's split into 2 parts. First, you have the former prophets, books like Joshua, Samuel, and Kings, which tell the history of the nation, the good and the bad. Then you get the latter prophets. These are the recorded speeches of messengers like Isaiah and Jeremiah, who spoke with passion, calling for justice and a return to God. And the third and final pillar of the Tanakh is the Ketuvim, the writings. Honestly, this is the most diverse room in the whole place. It's like the poetry lounge, the philosophy cafe, and the historical archive all rolled into one. You've got the beautiful prayers of Psalms, the deep wisdom of Proverbs and Job, the special scrolls that are read during Jewish holidays, and later histories like Daniel. It's just this amazing mix of song, wisdom, and storytelling.
All right, so we've explored that foundational library. Now, we're going to shift gears and look at a different architectural plan. Because while the Christian Bible uses the entire Tanakh, it organizes its library in a really different way, using a two-testament blueprint.
And this slide really nails the main difference in design. The Tanakh is one single collection, organized into those 3 sections we just talked about, but the Christian Bible is structured as a 2-part library. It takes the Tanakh, calls it the Old Testament, and then adds a whole new collection of 27 books called the New Testament.
So what does this word testament even mean? Well, it comes from a word that means covenant, which is like a sacred promise or a deep agreement. The entire organizing idea here is about covenants. The Old Testament is about the original covenant God made with Israel, and the New Testament is about what Christians believe is a new covenant made for all people through Jesus. This new wing of the library, the New Testament, has its own layout too. It starts with 4 books called the Gospels, which are basically 4 biographies of Jesus. After that is the book of Acts, which tells the story of the very first Christians. Then you have a whole bunch of letters, called epistles, that were written to guide these early communities. And the whole thing closes with the book of Revelation, which is a really wild book of prophecy.
Okay, this all leads to a really important question. With all these ancient scrolls and writings floating around for centuries, who decided which ones actually belonged in the official library? And that process brings us to this key idea of canon. The word canon is perfect here. It comes from an old word for a measuring rod, like a ruler. So a biblical canon is the official list of books that a faith community measures up and says, yep, these ones are in. These are our sacred, authoritative scriptures. It's the official blueprint that draws the line for what's in their library and what's not.
And what this timeline shows is so important. This library was not built in a day, not even close. For hundreds of years, these holy writings just existed as separate scrolls. There was no single bound book. The official lists, the canons, were formed slowly over time, with Jewish rabbis finalizing the Tanakh around 100 AD and various Christian councils debating and defining their lists for centuries after that.
And that whole long historical process of deciding the canon, that's the real key to understanding why. If you pick up a Jewish Bible, a Protestant Bible, and a Catholic Bible, you'll find that their libraries have slightly different floor plans and a different number of books.
So let's start with our baseline. The Jewish Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, contains 24 books.
Then you have the Protestant Bible, which has 66 books. It gets there by taking the same material as the Tanakh for its Old Testament, just counted and arranged differently, and adding the 27 books of the New Testament.
But then the Catholic Bible has 73 books. Why? Because its Old Testament includes 7 books that are not in the Tanakh or the Protestant Old Testament.
And just to show you how wide the range can be, the Ethiopian Orthodox canon is the largest, with 81 books. It's an ancient tradition that includes extra texts like the Book of Enoch, which it preserved when many other communities didn't.
So what's the deal with all the different numbers? It really all comes down to which ancient collection was used as the blueprint for the Old Testament. Protestant Bibles base their Old Testament on the 24 books of the Hebrew Tanakh, but the Catholic and Orthodox traditions base theirs on something called the Septuagint. That was an ancient Greek translation that was super popular in Jesus' time, and it just happened to include more books. Different blueprints, different libraries. Simple as that.
Okay, so understanding all this Bible architecture isn't just a fun history lesson. The very process of organizing all these texts, of creating structure from a pile of scrolls, holds a really deep lesson for how we can find meaning in our own lives.
I mean, really think about what they did. For centuries, scholars took this diverse, sometimes messy collection of individual scrolls and painstakingly built a coherent spiritual library. That action itself, creating order and meaning from many separate pieces, is a deeply human thing that we can all learn from.
And that brings us to our weekly challenge to work on our own inner dimensions. Inspired by the careful ordering of this ancient library, this week's challenge is to practice Seder, which is the Hebrew word for order. It's super simple. First, just find one small spot of chaos in your life. It could be a messy desk, a confusing schedule, whatever. Second, set a timer for 15 minutes this week and just create a little bit of structure there. And finally, just take a moment to notice how creating that little bit of outer order can bring a real sense of inner peace and clarity. Thank you for joining us for this complete journey through the Pardes. We hope these ancient truths help you and your family improve your own dimensions this week. If you enjoyed this full chapter deep dive, please like, subscribe, and share which part of the journey touched your soul in the comments. We'll see you in the next chapter.